People have come up to me over the years and asked me, Metal Dude, what is the most underrated album from this era? And my answer has been the same for well over 40 years. Tonight, you get to find out that answer. Plus, we're going to take a look at the top 5 heavy metal songs of 1981. Buckle up, this is going to be a good one. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we are going to discuss the most underrated heavy metal album, at least from this era. Riot, Fire Down Under. A lot of you have probably not heard of this album. I'm going to do you a little public service announcement favor. Allow me to be your tour guide for this unbelievably underrated album. Also, stick around because it's going to tie into the top 5 heavy metal songs of all time. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you might have recognized this fantastic album. It was part of the backdrop I had for year one. Just haven't had a chance to put these bad boys away. I know what you're thinking right now. You're saying, Metal Dude, that was months ago. You haven't cleaned up those albums yet? Don't you judge me. I'll get to it. Anyway, this bad boy right here got this album. Thank goodness I found this album. One of my all-time favorites. We're going to go through this one track by track. There's 2 types of albums that can make that Hall of Fame level of quality. The first type of album is what I call a perfect album. Every song on it is great to fantastic. I'll give you an example of that. Just last week's episode, we talked about Def Leppard, High and Dry. That is a definition of a perfect album because every song on it is great. But there's a second way you can become a Hall of Fame level album, and that's to have some of the best songs ever written on your album. If you've got 2 or 3 Hall of Fame level songs, your album automatically gets elevated to that point. This bad boy right here has not 1, not 2, but 4 Hall of Fame worthy songs. We're going to talk about them here in a second. Let me introduce you to this band, Riot. Lead guitarist, Mark Reale. If you listen to this album in particular, you're going to find a new favorite guitarist. I guarantee it. He is one of the all-time greats. Sandy Slavin on drums. I don't talk enough about drummers. I know, this has been a long-standing thing on this channel, but oh my goodness, Sandy Slavin, you're going to love this guy. Rick Ventura on guitars, writes a couple of songs on here. Guy Speranza, one of my favorite vocalists of all time. Unfortunately, this is the last Guy Speranza album, as he would leave the band after this. And finally, Kip Lemming on bass. So there you go. That's the band. The album has a little bit of a interesting history before we get into the tracks, and maybe explains why it's underrated. There's always reasons why things get lost over the sands of time. Number 1, oh my goodness, there was so much good metal coming on, as you're going to see through the heavy metal albums and the heavy metal songs that we're going to be recognizing over the next 2 weeks. What a time to be alive and listening to heavy metal music. So it was a little easier to get lost in the shuffle, number 1. Number 2, these guys had a major problem with their record label. Yes, you've heard this before, but in the 80s, we were slaves to the record labels. These guys had a record label that was being particularly troublesome. And in fact, one of the funny stories is, when they produced this album, their record label turned it down and said, ooh, too heavy. This will never sell anything. And then wouldn't let them out of their contracts, right? They sat there and held them hostage till another record company finally was able to free them up. It's one of the more bizarre stories in heavy metal history. I think that's one of the reasons that they never, this album never got discovered, because they had absolutely zero support from the record labels. And finally, they have a seal on the cover. I don't know that people back in the day, a lot of times you bought albums based on the album cover. Does this look metal or not? I'm not sure a flaming seal was exactly the marketing ploy they should have gone with. Having said that, I was lucky enough to find this baby. It is an all-time metal essential. Let's go through it track by track. As I mentioned in the opener, this album has 4 of the best tracks you're ever going to hear. Hall of Fame worthy. And the very first song on this album is one of them. Swords and Tequila. This is probably the best known Riot song. It's probably their most famous. This song, absolutely. If you say this right here is the best Riot song of all time, I won't argue. It is an absolute banger. Now, if you've never heard this song, let me give you a little bit of history about this song. The opening riff, if you are familiar with Iron Maiden's 2 Minutes to Midnight, that really crunchy, great opening riff in that song is pretty much identically the riff on this song, Swords and Tequila. The only difference is Swords and Tequila did come out a couple of years before 2 Minutes to Midnight. So, and I did happen to just see a video on YouTube one time about how that riff right there has been one of the most copied riffs in the history of heavy metal. So you can't necessarily say it's only Riot's. There's been variations of it across the 50 years of metal, but Riot knocks it out of the park. That opening riff is fantastic. Second thing about this is that it really tells a fantastic story. I think some of the best heavy metal songs of all time tell a story. This is kind of a post-apocalyptic story of civilization has fallen and people are scurrying about trying to survive in the big cities. And it's kind of controlled by different gangs and whatnot. Kind of reminds me a little bit. If you've ever seen the movie The Warriors from way back in the 70s, one of the best movies that really needs to be remade because it's a little bit cheesy, but the concept of it is fantastic. And the concept of it is there's a big gathering of all the gangs in New York. Someone kills the head of the gangs and then pins it on this gang called the Warriors. And now the Warriors have to go through all the different suburbs of New York, through all the little gangs with a bounty on their head. Very good stuff. This is kind of how I look at this song as well. Again, society has fallen. There's gangs running everywhere. But these guys are the good guys, and they're carrying swords, and they're drinking lots of tequila. I have a feeling the guys from Riot really like their tequila, because it comes up occasionally. At least twice on this album. Anyway, I always say this. If you're not going to take my advice, if you're going to say, okay, Metal Dude, you get one song, go ahead. Start right here. Very first track, Hall of Fame worthy, Riot, Swords and Tequila. It is right here where Riot, this album, starts to take on that Hall of Fame worthy mantra. Because they're about to do something amazing. We just got through with Swords and Tequila. One of the greatest songs ever written, folks. How do you follow that up? Riot does something very interesting here. They actually turn up the intensity. They decide, let's put a fast banger right after that and create a second Hall of Fame level song. The title track, Fire Down Under. If you like your metal songs like you like your sports cars, you like them to go fast, this is your huckleberry right here. Fire Down Under is blazing. It is blistering. We keep talking about Mark Reale. We keep talking about Mr. Slavin on the drums. They go crazy on this song. The opening riff to Swords and Tequila, classic. Copied by many other heavy metal bands throughout the years. This is a completely different riff, much faster, much more aggressive, and just as impressive. Unbelievable stuff. 2 Hall of Fames in a row, and we're just getting started. Now, what I'm going to say might be a little bit controversial, but you've had 2 of the best songs ever written back to back, and Riot decides it's time to change the pace a little bit. which is fine. And they're going to put a ballad in here called Feel the Same. Now, this is not one of their Hall of Fame level songs by any means, but it is very good. And I do want to point out that, again, I say this all the time, the hair metal movement kind of ruined ballads and gave them a bad name for a long time. As please don't, no obligatory ballad, please, anything but that. But this is actually a very good ballad, and I really like it because it's got some teeth. It's got, again, a great guitar solo in it, but it's also real. It just really talks about, you get into a relationship, it's a dead end, and you wonder if the other person is in the same boat that you're in. Like, there's no big fireworks. It's like, this isn't really working. Do you see it? Are we on the same page here? Because this isn't working. I love this song. And again, after the intensity of the title track, you really do need to slow it down. This is a great pace change of the album because we're going to get right back to it in the very next song. A nice little pause here. A very good ballad, Feel the Same. The very first of this, we talked about how Swords and Tequila, probably their best known song. Many people would consider it their greatest song. But I'm not one of them, because I think their greatest song happens right here at track number 4. Outlaw is unbelievable, folks. Okay, let me set the stage. Once again, they're going to tell an amazing story. It kind of has a Western flair to it, but essentially they talk about different characters in the Old West, the gambler, and the Mexican bandito that they're living life on the edge, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. And one of the stories they tell of this Mexican bandito who steals a bunch of gold and is headed back to Mexico, and there's a posse hunting him down. So the first of the song is excellent, and it really, the chorus, it spins around in a roulette wheel. I mean, it's really got a great old Western feel. But the ending of this song is what makes it the best song on the album, because the Mexican bandito thinks he's in the clear, and so he stops and again starts imbibing on tequila and celebrating his bounty. Little does he know the posse's coming right behind him. They're about to take him down. But right before the posse gets there, they have the bandito in an obviously ecstatic drunken stupor talking all sorts of shit in Spanish. It is hilarious. And while he's in the background doing this monologue, Mark Reale is shredding it with his guitar work. One of the most intense, beautiful guitar solos you'll ever hear. If you think Swords and Tequila is best, no argument here. But my vote goes to Outlaw. As we mentioned earlier, this is not a perfect album. It's got highs and it's got lows. This is really the first of the skippable songs. Don't Bring Me Down, which is a funny song, believe it or not, about a really bad breakup, where the singer extols all the terrible things that his girlfriend is doing and reason why he's breaking up with her. And one of the more hilarious moments, she does wreck the car, but even worse, she brings it home with Bruce Springsteen in the stereo. I find that hilarious. A little gentle shot at the boss. Of course, the boss is from right down the road in New Jersey at that time. And I couldn't agree more. Like, not to get on a tangent here, but Bruce Springsteen's one of those bands that I've never quite got. Like, there are some big popular acts throughout history. Maybe I'll do a video about it where, like, I don't quite get it. But hey, more power to him. He's milked one good song into like a 50-year career, so good for him. But to me, Bruce Springsteen equals mediocre. Anyway, but I think it's funny because I do believe that one of the things that really makes a relationship, at least for me, is I'm not sure how I could live with someone who had terrible musical tastes. I once broke up with a girl because she liked Men Without Hats. And listen, I'm here extolling the virtues of the 80s, but we had a few things wrong in the 80s too. Look up Men Without Hats, Safety Dance. When I broke up with her, I said, "You can't dance. You can't dance. You can no longer get in my pants." You'd have to see the video to get that joke, but give it a try. Anyway, so like in the comments below, is there a group that you would break up with your significant other over if they come home and listen to that 24/7? Because, man, Springsteen would be right up there. Anyway, I found it funny. It's a decent song. Like I said, it's not terrible or anything, but not one of the great songs on this album. Sensing the album needs a little kick in the tail at this point, Riot delivers with another good, fast song. Don't hold back. When you have an album, remember there's two sides to an album. You really want to start each album off, in my humble opinion, with a real blazer. Riot pulls this off right here. They know that they have to kick the energy up, and they do so really well. Don't Hold Back, not Hall of Fame level, but it's a very good song. One of the deep tracks on this that you might want to go check out. As I mentioned, this album has 4 Hall of Fame worthy songs on it. We've talked about 3. Here's number 4. Altar of the Kings. Oh, baby, do I love this song. Once again, Riot tells amazing stories on this album. We had the post-apocalyptic Swords and Tequila. We had the old Western Outlaw. And here we go all the way back into medieval times. You know, there's a lot of power metal that loves to talk about medieval times, but this is not power metal. It is pure heavy metal that covers a power metal topic. I'm shocked. You know, one of the things that I like about Iron Maiden is they really have a diverse storytelling in all their albums. And Riot, this is like the 3rd song that is just unbelievable, takes you to a different place. The vision of this song is so fantastic. We talked about the fact that this album just didn't make it for a myriad of reasons. If some smart record producer would have said, you know what, this album, not only is it good, but it's got 3 visually stunning stories it tells. If they had made videos for these 3 songs, we might be talking about Riot like we talk about Maiden and we talk about Priest. This album has so many great songs, so many songs that would have made great videos. What a wasted opportunity. Make sure you Altar the King starts with this beautiful guitar intro, very mellow, and then it kicks in and has that kind of heavy metal gallop that I love. If you just want to check out a few songs on this album, I've given you the big 4. Make sure you listen to all of them, and then you will agree this is going to be one of your favorite albums of all time. For every yin, there's a yang. For every great Hall of Fame song, well, occasionally there's a lemon. The next song on here is a song, No Lies. Interestingly enough, Riot kind of has their own style, right? So on both sides of the album, they kind of start off hot, and then they kind of right in the middle of the album kind of take a step back and do like a ballad, and then finish strong. That's their style, right? Interestingly enough, both of the ballads on side A and side B, both written by guitarist Rick Ventura, who, like, is he like their designated ballad writer? All right, Ventura, write us a ballad. While the first one I love to death, this one I don't care for. This is probably every album you have to say, you know, might have a song. This is the low point of the album. The chorus is a little choppy, not really my cup of tea. But again, this isn't a perfect album. It's just a fantastic album. Highs and lows, my friends, highs and lows. This one's a bit of a low. The one thing I like about how Riot constructs their albums is it does seem like the minute they have a little bit of a lemon, a little bit of a skippable song, they come back strong. Run for Your Life is a real banger. Maybe not a Hall of Famer, not up with the other four, but probably this is my fifth favorite song on the album, pretty easily. It's fast, it's furious, um, and it again really I like the way they pace the album, going from slow to going back to a real fast song. Not as fast and as intense as Fire Down Under, but really close. Very good song here. Again, if you like fast metal, check this one out. Run for Your Life. The final song on the album is a bit of a personal favorite, Flashbacks, where Riot plays a series of clips, while very similar to what they do in Outlaw, while Mark Reality is just in the back, just shredding. Again, if you listen to this album and don't come away thinking, Mark Reality, where's he been my entire life? I don't know what to tell you. Dude is a freaking legend. He is a freaking maestro of the guitar. But anyway, Flashback has a couple of interesting stories to it. The little clips that they're playing in the interludes of, overlaying Mark's guitar playing. The first story is, we'll start with the good. As you know, we're right in the heart of the new wave of British heavy metal. And the new wave of British heavy metal was largely started by a man by the name of Neil Kay, who was a disc jockey in England. Remember, this is a couple of years ago. The punk movement has completely swamped England. We're talking The Clash and Sex Pistols, etc. And all of a sudden, Neil Kay hears Iron Maiden and Saxon, Def Leppard, and he starts playing this heavy metal music in the clubs. And the kids are like, wait a minute, this is better than punk. This is better than the music we've been listening to. And it starts this whole big movement in England. Now, new wave of British heavy metal sounds just like that. These are all British bands. But Neil Kay heard Riot from New York City and kind of adopted in an American band, this band. That's how good Riot was, is that in this big explosion of all this great music coming out of England, the guy that started all this looked across the pond and went, they belong with us. This is really good stuff. So some of the clips are talking about how after, all the difficulties of, everything going on, they actually get Riot over to London to play some songs. One of my most prized possessions, I have an album from Castle Donington. I think it's now called Download. I will never get over that. Castle Donington sounds so much better. These corporate sponsorships are so bad. Anyway, but this Castle Donington album, we're talking about some of the greats, Rainbow and the Scorpions and Riot. That's how the people who really knew what was happening in music, they saw the beauty of Riot. Now, the flip side of that is, while all these, people who had a real ear for music had discovered Riot, their record label was out to lunch. And so this also talks about, in the clips, some of the problems they were having with their record company. We touched on it earlier, but man, this band had so much potential only to get screwed over by their record companies. I am so glad we have the internet. I am so glad bands have an unfiltered way to get to their fans now. Back in the day, if the record label screwed you over, there was no way to get your music to the masses, and I think that's what happened here. So Flashback talks about the good and the bad and sends us out on yet another unbelievable Mark Reality guitar solo. Go check this album out. It really is a metal essential. This should be in every heavy metal fan's library. It is one of the all-time best. But speaking of all-time best, 1981, oh boy, do we have a lot of great heavy metal. Let's talk about what the 5 best songs of 1981 are next. Our first nominee for Heavy Metal Song of the Year, Accept, with the song Breaker. Now, Accept has had a couple of albums up to this point. They've been kind of trying to find their sound and try to fit in. But I think it's right here where Accept just says, you know what? We're We're not going to try to be someone we're not. We're not going to try to fit a certain song type. We're not going to try to, model ourselves. I think in the early years, Accept was really trying to be AC/DC, and Accept was never going to be AC/DC. Way too much anger, way too much intensity to be AC/DC. Udo Dirkschneider and the boys finally find their sound right here. This is when I started to go, who is this German masterpiece right here? Accept starts to really heavy up their sound and really brings it on this song, Breaker. Now, for those of you who have heard this song before, it also has some of the worst lyrics in the history of heavy metal, and it's such a good song, it doesn't matter. Icicle brains, bicycle chains. What does that even mean? I don't know. But it's still going to get nominated for Song of the Year right here. Our first nominee, Accept, Breaker. Our second nominee, the Legends, Black Sabbath, with what I think might be their best song of all time, Falling Off the Edge of the World. Now, we all know the big hits for Black Sabbath. We all have heard Paranoid. We have all heard Iron Man. We've all heard, War Pigs. And even off this album, I would say Mob Rules is probably the biggest hit. So it's funny that you find maybe the best song in the history of a band in kind of a deep cut, but Falling Off the Edge of the World. First of all, it really hits my sweet spot when it comes to tropes because it starts off very light, doomy, but light. And then there's kind of a little bit of an interlude. And then Tony Iommi just kicks in with just this monster jam. If you've been listening to the channel, you know the Black Sabbath era with Dio is my favorite. And one of the reasons is the playing of Tony Iommi. And on this song in particular, if you are a fan of Tony Iommi, if you are a fan of monster riffs, stop what you're doing and go check this off. Our second nominee, Falling Off the Edge of the World. Speaking of Black Sabbath, but in another way, Ozzy's got a pretty good solo career going right now. And he has an opening track that is an absolute blazer. Our third nominee, Over the Mountain by Ozzy Osbourne. This song, what an album opener. I have a soft spot for a good album opener. You can't get any better than Over the Mountain. Just a thunderous, gallopy opening riff by Randy Rhoads. This song cooks, sets the whole stage for the whole album. Love this song. Love Randy Rhoads playing. I'm not even going to talk about. This is kind of our last bit with Randy Rhoads, but boy, what a way to start off one of his best albums ever. Our third nominee, Ozzy Osbourne, Over the Mountain. We already talked about it, so I'm not going to go into great detail on this. Our fourth nominee, surprise, surprise, from the band Riot, and the song Outlaw. We talked about this album. Don't need to go into it, but I'm telling you, these guys could have got 2 or 3 nominations this year. That's how good those songs are, but I'm going to go with my favorite, Outlaw, as our fourth nominee. And finally, wrapping this up, the Tigers of Pantang come in with Gangland. Oh boy, the John Sykes era has arrived, and the Tigers of Pantang are going to put out not 1, but 2 amazing albums in 1981. Trying to pick one song off those 2 albums was difficult, but this one snuck past some of the others. What a riff. What a fast-moving, heavy song. Love this song to death. Tigers of Pantang, much like Riot, if you want to look at some underrated bands, some underrated albums, we'll go back to 1981, start listening to Tigers of Pantang in the John Sykes era, you're going to be amazed. And by the way, Tigers of Pantang are still bringing it to this day. If you haven't heard some of their new stuff, little pitch for that last album of theirs, it is also a blazer. Our fifth and final nominee, Tigers of Pantang, Ganglands. And the winner is? I recently put out a video well, about a year ago, where I talked about how Falling Off the Edge of the World might be the greatest heavy metal song of all time. I do believe it's the best Black Sabbath song of all time. So as much as I like Riot, Outlaw, and Fire Down Under, this is one of the ultimate Sophie choice, because I think both of them, I think so highly of Outlaw that I could actually see myself giving that award to them. But boy, they just happened to run into the buzzsaw known as Black Sabbath and the Mob Rules, and Falling Off the Edge of the World has to win the award. The other three songs on here are all really good, but it really boiled down to Falling Off the Edge of the World versus Outlaw. And if you caught me in a different mood tomorrow, maybe I'd go Outlaw. That's how close this competition is. But Falling Off the Edge of the World has Dio at the height of his powers vocally, Tony Iommi again with the unbelievable riff, Vinny Appice on drums, Geezer Butler on bass. The recording of Mob Rules. It's interesting. We talked about this a little bit a while back with the two Black Sabbath albums have the same producer, but the results are completely different. The production on Mob Rules, oof, this is just so good. So it breaks my heart. But the winner is Falling Off the Edge of the World by Black Sabbath. Now, interestingly enough, the Grammys that year went with, to me, almost a comical choice. If you were around back then, there was a gal by the name of Kim Carnes, and she had the song Betty Davis Eyes. That's right. The song of the year was a gal that sounded eerily like Rod Stewart. Oh, by the way, like if you've ever heard, like, sometimes we have in the heavy metal world the singers that do the real deep gutturals, and you think, whoa, it doesn't sound like a chick at all. But Betty Davis Eyes, Kim Carnes sounds just like Rod Stewart. It was like weird. So put on a Rod Stewart song, and then put this one on, and then just be amazed. But it was basically about an old actress. I think she was like in some, scary type of psychotic type roles. Famous actress back in the day, Betty Davis Eyes. That's what the Grammys went with. Kim Carnes, another one-hit wonder. The Grammys are just a field of littered one-hit wonders all over the place. Whereas you see bands like Black Sabbath, year after year, being a major influence in music, not even getting a sniff. So, sorry, Kim Carnes. Your claim to fame, if I was running the Grammys, would be over right here. And Song of the Year would have to go to Black Sabbath, Falling Off the Edge of the World, winning not just in the heavy metal category, but across the board. And that's our show. But before you leave, click, subscribe, do all the things that make the algorithm happy. We feed the algorithm here on the Metal Dude Abides, so we can continue to give you this high quality content. And next week, here's why you want to subscribe, because you don't want to miss next week, because it's the Granddaddy episode. We're going to be talking about the best heavy metal album of 1981. And I'm telling you, we've got 5 albums that should be in everybody's collection. These are classics, each and every one of them. You don't want to miss it. Come to you every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock Mountain Time. Until then, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.